and then I will connect over to Facebook in just a minute. So let's see. All right. As folks filter in Zoom, we just want to welcome you and thank you for being here with us tonight. This is our behind the scenes couple of moments as we get ready to tether over to Facebook. We are very excited for you to be here with us tonight, virtually on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Awesome. We've got a great group of people. If you guys are, as you are logging into Zoom, if you would like to put in the chat where you're watching from, we always like to know where everybody is and where they're participating from. If you are participating tonight, there will be an opportunity at the end to come on camera, show us your cocktails, show us what you made, which we did last time, which was a lot of fun. I am not following along because that would probably turn into a very big disaster if I were trying to multitask with this many things. So
fun disaster.
A Mardi Gras disaster. So again, those of you who are joining us in Zoom, thank you very much for being here. We are live in 2 different places tonight. We do this regularly where we're live in Zoom, and we also tether over to Facebook. So we're going to do that in just a minute. So if you're following along, you could take a moment to get yourselves ready to mix up some cocktails with Brian tonight. And then I'm going to tether over to Zoom and we're going to get started. And we have someone who's watching from the People's Republic of Cambridge. Welcome, Peter. And we also have folks in Scotch Plains, New Jersey and Lexington, Kentucky. So to Lawrence in Lexington, Kentucky, my shirt is from a Kentucky company. It says y'all, since we're doing a little Southern thing tonight. So very excited to be here with all of you. And I'll give it just another moment and then I will tether over to Facebook. So because I used to have someone who helped me do this, there's like a moment delay. So just with me and get that set up and then we'll be live and we'll get started with our, oh, we have someone in New Orleans. Yay. Thank you so much for joining us. You'll have to tell us what you think of Brian's presentation, how authentically New Orleans it is. And Santa Monica, California. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. We're very excited to have you. And I'm going to go ahead and tether over to Facebook. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get started with our Yale Alumni Live Feb Club. So just a moment. It takes me a second to connect over to our friends on Facebook and then we will get started. Okay. We should be over there in just a moment, everybody. Hang tight. We're excited to have Brian back for his 2nd round of Yale Alumni Live. Actually 3rd, right? Brian, you've been on 3 times, haven't you?
It's only the 2nd time.
Well, you joined us for USS Constitution.
That's true, I did, yes.
Awesome.
But I didn't mix any cocktails for that.
That's true. That would have been a little bit dicey at, what was it, like noon, I think, that day. I mean, more fun, but not quite as safe probably in the middle of the day. All right.
It is a grand tradition of the navies of the world to drink in the middle of the day, although I think they've been discouraging that in recent years.
I love it. Okay, I think I can see that we are on in Facebook. Oh, I see everybody in Facebook land. Okay, excellent. So thank you all so much for being here. My name is Stephanie, and I am a member of the regional clubs team at the Yale Alumni Association, and I am your host for Yale Alumni Live. This is our official Feb Club Yale Alumni Live episode, and we are so happy to be here today, both in Zoom and on Facebook Live with Brian Hoefling, who is the president of the Yale Club of Boston and a master cocktail maker who I believe also just had a book come out. So you'll have to tell us a little bit about that, Brian. Of course, he has a copy. We'll make sure everybody knows how to find that. Brian's going to be mixing up some awesome cocktails for us tonight, reminiscent of Bourbon Street in New Orleans in honor of Mardi Gras. So we are very excited to have you here. We did provide the ingredients so you can follow along this evening if you purchase those in advance, but you can always come back and check this recording to follow along with Brian in the future. So just as a really quick reminder, if you have questions as Brian is delivering our class tonight, you can put those in the chat in Zoom or right into the feed in Facebook, and I will get those over to him. So I think without further ado, I will throw it over to you, Brian. Tell us just a little bit about yourself. Even though this is Brian's third episode of Yale Alumni Live, you may have seen him before. Tell us a little bit about you, Brian, and then you can get right into mixing. So thank you so much for being here, and let's go.
That sounds fabulous, and it is, as always, my pleasure to be here, and a very, very exciting evening, I hope, for us all. So, as stated, I am Brian Hoefling. I was ES'12 College class of 2012. My interest in all things cocktails and spirits does, in fact, go back to college, and I do not just mean that in the sort of euphemistic sense that normally sounds like when I say it. My senior year of college, I taught a seminar to a group of other seniors, some of whom might even be on the line tonight, here's hoping, regarding cocktails. The idea was some folks were concerned they didn't know how to drink like adults yet. They knew that I had an interest in classic cocktails, and we would meet once a week and do 2 to 3 drinks in our sweetened styles and just go through a whole syllabus that I come up with of drinks that we ought to know before graduation. That was one of the most fun things I've done in my life, and it helped redirect me towards the hospitality industry more broadly. I have now written 2 books on spirits and cocktails, which we can circle back around to at the end, although one of them is the one that I highlighted earlier, from which all the recipes, all the particular versions of the recipes of these drinks that we're going to be making here today come. I actually have a 3rd book coming out later this year, which is based on that same senior year cocktail seminar. It is called the Cocktail Seminars, and it takes this kind of curriculum-driven approach to teaching people the fine art of mixing drinks from the assumption that you know nothing whatsoever, and then iteratively over the course of 5 progressively more difficult courses to a reasonable level of mastery for a home bartender. This is the demographic that I've been most interested in for my career. I run a business here in Cambridge called the Herzog Cocktail School, through which I give cocktail lessons, usually to people who are celebrating occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, Fridays, Tuesdays, whatever. And I have been doing remote cocktail classes as well since the pandemic began. Given that this is a Tuesday, and it is an appropriate Tuesday for celebrating, I think, Stephanie, if that's a reasonably good introduction, I think I will launch right into some conversations about recipes.
I think that's perfect. You know, it's post dinner here on the East Coast, happy hour on the West Coast, and probably the perfect time for cocktails in the middle of our fine country. So let's have at it. Thanks, Brian.
Fabulous. Thank you, Stephanie. I will say the very first time that I went to New Orleans was shortly after I had graduated from Yale. It was shortly after I had wrapped up that cocktail seminar that I mentioned. And I went there for an event called Tales of the Cocktail, which is the largest cocktail convention in the world. This is a real thing that really exists. There are cocktail conferences that happen throughout the year, at least in normal times. And Tales is the major leagues, 10,000 bartenders and spirits writers and hospitality professional people who make and drink alcohol at a very high level descend on the city of New Orleans for the better part of a week in July. And I have gone most years since then. That was the second thing that made me think I need to stay in this industry. I absolutely adore the city of New Orleans. I have very fond memories of specific cocktails that I have had there on specific occasions, and actually we're going to make a couple of those here tonight. So without further ado, we're going to start with the Sazerac, which is, I think, is probably fair to say the most iconic of all of the New Orleans drinks. Although I could probably rattle off like a dozen classic cocktails that originate in New Orleans. So there's a lot of competition there, but the Sazerac is a very strong contender. It dates to the very end of the 19th century under that name. It is, I will spoil the ending here a little bit, but it is a descendant of something called the improved whiskey cocktail. Basically, over the course of the 19th century, we had an evolution of the idea of a cocktail from something that looks a lot like an old-fashioned to a broader category. And along the way, things that looked like old-fashions but had a little bit of doctoring, maybe some maraschino liqueur, maybe a little bit of absinthe, acquired the moniker of improved whiskey cocktails. The Sazerac is a very, very effective job of capturing and rendering and distilling, if you will, the essence of this concept into a single drink. The recipe that I'll be making today, which matches the one in my book, is based on one that a cocktail historian, which is, again, a real thing that really exists, Dave Wondrich has reconstructed on the basis of notes going back about 120 years that he has unearthed. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do when making a Sazerac is get yourself a nice rocks glass and get yourself some absinthe. If you don't have absinthe, an absinthe substitute of some type. Anisette is a common option. There are, from back when absinthe was banned, there are a handful of other products that are designed to imitate the flavor of it. Basically, you want something that's going to have that really forward aniseed taste, and additional herbaceousness is good if you can get it. So I have here a bottle of absinthe from St. George Distillery in California. Lovely company, excellent product. Genuinely, I never thought that I was going to finish this bottle when I got it, because it's 750 milliliters of absinthe. And most recipes that call for absinthe call for approximately this much. Now that's about perfect. I have had this bottle for many, many years. So the reason that I've just dumped about a teaspoon, maybe a little less, into the glass is we're going to rinse the glass with the absinthe. We want to coat it as much as possible, get it all around the edges. If you're doing this at home, you'll have the experience that I've just had, where just as I was setting it down, a whole big burst of absinthe aroma came up into my face. Taste, as I have said, for those of you who've been to one of my classes before, I'll be a broken record about this. What we think of as taste includes both taste and smell. The tongue picks out 5 different flavors that we know of: sweet, salty, savory, bitter, and sour. The nose picks out tens of thousands of distinct flavor chemicals and hundreds of thousands, millions of combinations of those, each of which we encode separately. So when we experience the flavor of something, we are a huge, huge part of that is smell. And so something like absinthe that is very strongly aromatic and used in this way, where we're getting a lot of the aroma, is going to make a huge contribution to the drink, even though there's not that much in the drink in the first place. Traditionally, the Sazerac is prepared in a second rocks glass and then strained into the one that I just mentioned. If you would like to do this in a slightly more conventional way, the way it's done for other cocktails, you can get yourself a mixing glass or a cocktail shaker, mix it in there and strain it. The drink will taste the same, but I do think that the traditional performance is part of the experience of the Sazerac, if you will. So to proceed, we are going to need a jigger measure, which is what I've got here. If you do not have a jigger at home, anything that will allow you to measure fluid volumes will work. But if you're going to be making a lot of cocktails going forward, get yourself one of these. They're very handy, very convenient. And this one here has markings on the inside of its 1 ounce and 2 ounce measures, so that I can do 3/4, half an ounce, ounce and a half very easily, very quickly. We're going to want to take 2 ounces of rye whiskey, like so. When measuring with a jigger, incidentally, you can usually fill it higher than you think you should without spilling over the top. And depending on how good your eye is, that may actually be a significant difference in volume. They're designed to be filled all the way to the top or to the edge of the line on the inside. Next thing we're going to want is a teaspoon of simple syrup. If you do not have simple syrup, as its name suggests, it is very easy to make. You take 1 part sugar, 1 part water, mix them together, that's it. If you got something like this, a lovely squeeze bottle, you can just put them both in there and shake them up until they dissolve. Mason jar will work the same way. Basically, any environment where you can seal it and give it a good shake will dissolve it very quickly. Don't even need to heat it on the stove. So I've got my whiskey, I've got my sugar. I'm now going to take Peychaud's bitters, the classic bitters of New Orleans, which has a lovely anise-forward palate that has, I would say, undertones of stone fruit. You get a little hint of like cherry pits and stems in there. It's very, very nice. This is going to be the majority bitters in our Sazerac with 4 dashes. 1, 2, 3, 4. I should have explained how to do a dash, but you just watched me. Essentially, you're going to want to take your bitters bottle and turn it upside down and give it a good shake. That's 1 dash, 2 dashes, 3 dashes, 4 dashes. There's a lot of dispute on this last point, whether to use Angostura bitters in addition to the Peychauds in a Sazerac or Peychauds only. The Wondrich recipe, which is the oldest one that we're aware of, calls for both. Peychauds more, Angostura less, but it does call for both. I have tried both versions, and I gotta say, I like that extra little hint of Angostura in here. Angostura is a bitters from Trinidad. It is the most common cocktail bitters, and it has a very sort of earthy baking spice palette. All right, so we've now got everything in our Sazerac mixing glass that we're going to need. I'm going to grab a few ice cubes. And I'm going to give this a nice stir. This here is a bar spoon. It's got these lovely little twists in the handle that make it very easy to rotate as you spin, as you stir the drink with it. So it's a more smooth, fluid process, if you will. But any old spoon or a chopstick or whatever you've got handy will also do the job. So
I feel like that little chapstick comment, Brian, might have come from residential college days. Anything will do, anything will make it work, right? If there's a will, there's a way.
That's absolutely true, although I never can recall having used a chopstick to do this while I was in college. In fairness, I also didn't have most of these tools most of the time when I was in college, so it was more of a, well, put it in the glass and swirl it around a handful of times, which will work, but not as effectively. So I've got my absinthe rinsed glass, I've got my stirred cocktail over here, and I'm going to strain it through this lovely Hawthorne strainer, which if you want to get a little detail on that, as you can see, it's got some perforations in the plate the liquid goes through, and it's got this nice spring that lets it sit flush against basically any shape or dimension of mixing vessel within reason. I've now added it to the glass. There is one final step in this process that is critically important in the Sazerac and in many other cocktails as well, which is expressing a lemon peel over it. So I've just sliced a piece of the peel off a lemon. I'm going to take it between my fingers and just give it a nice squeeze, like so. Over the glass, directing the peel down, so you'll get a nice little spray of aromatic lemon lemon aromatic chemicals off the top. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Sazerac, and it is in its finished form. If you are ready at home, I'm going to say cheers. And if you are not, I trust that you'll catch up with us in a moment. So cheers.
Cheers, Brian. Really quick, we did have a question. How much simple syrup did you put in there?
Oh, I'm sorry. 1 teaspoon of simple syrup is what I put in there.
Well, the audience is paying attention and they covered that, but we just wanted to confirm for everybody, make sure it was just the right recipe. So if anybody made that cocktail just now and wants to share a picture or keep it for later when we bring people on camera, let us know what you thought of it. And you have, how many cocktails do you have for us tonight, Brian?
I've got 3 cocktails for us tonight. And in the interest of not getting everybody absolutely plastered immediately, I think it might make sense for us to break in between recipes for a question or two if people have them. Does that seem reasonable?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If anybody is watching and has any questions about the drinks, feel free to put them in the chat. But Brian, let me ask you while we give everybody the opportunity to do that. How, I know we've talked about this before, how important or has your opinion changed of the tools that you actually use? You always hear about, you know, sometimes the tools make a world of difference. Have you found that one brand is amazing? Would you recommend, you know, like some sort of kit for people who want to really start mixing cocktails at home? What do you have to say about tools overall, Brian?
Great question. So I would say that I haven't acquired extremely strong brand preferences about my bar tools. I will say that for those, and I know that there are a decent number of you who are in the greater Boston area, there is a wonderful cocktail supply shop in Davis Square, Somerville called the Boston Shaker. And they will sell you not only bar tools and bitters and syrups and things like that, as well as books, including mine, but they will also sell kits. If you wanted to get sort of a basic bar kit that includes a lot of these things, you can get them there. If you are local, they will do curbside pickup. And if you are not, they'll actually ship anywhere in the lower 48 at least, I think possibly anywhere in the country. Another company that is worth looking into is called Cocktail Kingdom. They have an online store and they make a lot of the bar tools that are out there. You can buy direct from them. And I've generally been satisfied with their products. I will say, you know, I learned to mix cocktails the way I think a lot of people learn to mix cocktails, which is with what was available, both in terms of ingredients and equipment. And so that's something that's always kind of in the back of my mind when I say things like, you know, if you don't have a cocktail shaker, anything that you can seal will do the job as well. If you've got a mason jar, that'll work. That's because that's kind of the way that I think, you know, how will people be able to make these drinks in the wild? I think that in general, you will be better off if you're going to make a lot of cocktails, getting your hands on some, you know, proper bar tools. But there are definitely workarounds if you really need it that you can find.
Thank you. Oh, Brian, quickly, we got 2 questions that I want to make sure I get over to you. What kind of rye whiskey were you using?
Oh, great question. The rye whiskey that I'm using here is Gunpowder Rye. This is distilled in Maine. It is a lovely product. I had it smell for a while as well, actually. But broadly speaking, rye whiskeys are classified in kind of 2 different ways based on whether there is a significant corn influence or not. I should back up and say rye whiskey is any whiskey made in the United States that has at least 51% rye grain in the blend of grains that are used to make it. Most American whiskeys are made using multiple kinds of grain. And a fairly common mash bill is the term we would use for rye whiskey would include rye, corn, and barley. There are a number of rye whiskeys out there that do not include the corn, and a number that do, and that's sort of the primary distinction between the 2. I tend to favor, I've forgotten which one is the former, which one's the latter, but the Monongahela style is what they call the ones that do not use corn. I think you get much more of a rye bread character out of whiskeys like that, that have that sort of spicy rye and kind of doughy barley coming much more forward, as opposed to, you know, a higher corn percentage will taste a bit more like a bourbon, which is not a bad thing. But for me, if I want bourbon, I'm going to drink bourbon. And if I want rye, I'm going to go for Monongahela style rye.
Thank you. We have a couple more, Brian, before we move on. Yeah, I think, yep, we had a question about whether or not you emptied the rocks glass of any of the surplus absinthe, or if you just leave the entire teaspoon in.
Great question. Honestly, it's entirely up to you. When people say rinse the glass, the sort of like formally proper thing that is meant by that is you want to get as much of the surface area covered as possible. And if there's any liquid droplet left, you want to pour that out. If you like absinthe, you can leave it in. Frankly, there was so little left in my absinthe bottle that was a step that I was never even going to bother with. But that's a judgment call, I would say.
Great. And then if someone is making some simple syrup at home, how long will it last in that little squeeze bottle?
I have never had simple syrup go bad on me, is the short answer to that question. Sugar in sufficient quantity can kind of function as a preservative. Admittedly, you are making sugar or water, which is a less, shelf stable thing. But I'd say keep it in the fridge, and the likelihood that you're going to have any trouble with it, however long it takes you to use it, is very, very low. Use your judgment. If it no longer smells or tastes like sugar water, don't drink it. Yeah, that's a problem that I have literally never encountered in my own home.
Great. I mean, that's great. Keep it in the fridge forever. Another quick question from someone following along. So I'm really excited that you guys are trying this recipe. And I see that my internet says unstable, so hopefully you can still hear me. Someone said that theirs tasted a little bit too much like rye whiskey and nothing else. Is that because they didn't use enough of something? Or what's kind of a troubleshooting answer you would have for something that didn't taste quite right?
2 thoughts there. One possibility, which as I'm reviewing this occurs to me, yeah. So the rye whiskey that I'm using and the recipe that I'm working with is meant for sort of standard proof, something on the order of 80 proof, 40% alcohol by volume. One possibility is you're using a stronger rye than that. I probably should have called out this possibility early on. Rittenhouse is a very common rye whiskey brand that is 100 proof. And if you use that in this recipe, you will taste more of the rye than you will the lower strength whiskey. The short answer, honestly, the simplest thing you can do in that situation, add some more simple syrup. That will do 2 things, one of which is you will add some sugar that you can kind of counterbalance the whiskey with. But the other thing that it will do is it will enhance your perception of the flavors that are there. We pick up on things more when there is a higher proportion of sugar in what we're consuming. This is a sort of evolutionary thing, right? Sugar means calories, energy. This is good. We want more of this. We're going to notice what it tastes like. We're going to remember what it tastes like. This is one of the reasons that we put sugar in cocktails. So I would say my first recommendation would be add a bit of sugar, whatever the sort of underlying reason is. If you are using a higher proof rye whiskey, I would say cut it back by like 1/4 of an ounce and keep everything else the same the next time you make the drink, and it should be more in balance. And if the sugar isn't enough, more bitters.
I am very impressed, as in our audience because you nailed it. Apparently, Robert was using 100 proof Rittenhouse, and that's exactly what happened. So look at that. Brian's an expert, guys. This is why we have him. This is why we bring him back. He is our cocktail expert. So there were a couple other comments that I'm going to hold to the end for a little bit of conversation so you can move on to the next cocktail, Brian.
That sounds good. All right. The next cocktail that we have coming up is another New Orleans classic. This one is a little bit younger. It dates back to 1938, I believe. And it is a creation of the Hotel Monteleone, an awesome place. Next time you're in New Orleans, they have a bar there that is called the Carousel Bar because it is literally designed to rotate. Very first time that I went there, I did not know this fact about it. I discovered it when I was midway through my second drink and was a little bit concerned that I might have had more drinks than I thought I had had. You're sitting at the bar and realize that suddenly the room around you looks very different than 10 minutes ago. Monteleone, lovely old hotel, also incidentally is sort of ground zero base camp for Tales of the Cocktail. The name of the cocktail is either in French, it would be Vieux Carré. In Anglicized French, it would be Vieux Carré. And in New Orleans French, it is Vieux Carré, which is the name of the neighborhood as it is pronounced in the local patois. And is consequently also what it is often called by bartenders, although not always, and certainly not always by patrons. I invite you to pronounce it whichever way feels more natural to you. Candidly, I'm probably going to use both over the course of the next few minutes. The Vieux Carré is a more standard stirred drink. Like the Sazerac, we're going to put ice in a glass, stir it with a bar spoon, then strain it into another vessel. We're going to put ice in a mixing tin and then strain it into another vessel. We're going to skip that whole ritualistic aspect of making it in one rocks glass and pouring it into another. The Vieux Carré is also a very easy drink to remember. It's really very straightforward. You've got three ingredients that you're going to use an ounce of, and those are, once again, we have rye whiskey. Same one I used last time. If you are using Rittenhouse at home, it should be less of an issue to use a full ounce here than it was to use a full 2 ounces for that Sazerac. But if you want to dial it back, it's always easier to add than it is to subtract. We're going to add a little bit of brandy. This is a very common ingredient in old New Orleans drinks, although over time, some of them did begin to substitute whiskey. But New Orleans has that French influence, and so it was a brandy drink in town first. I am realizing that my third ingredient is still in my fridge, so I'm going to go grab that. This is actually a great teachable moment for everybody.
It's okay, Brian. We had somebody else who said that they went to the Carousel Bar, Brian. It was a great experience, but they had to wait quite a while for a seat at the revolving bar. And I was laughing to myself because I'm sure we've all had an experience when we looked up from a bar and thought, this looks a little different than it did a little while ago.
Absolutely. And I've had that experience in other places, don't get me wrong, but usually it tells me something about my day and not about the bar itself.
And I'm quite sure that many Yale alumni might have had that moment at Toad's a time or two. So we're all on the same page here.
Indeed. So ingredient number 3 that I'm going to add an ounce of here is sweet vermouth. And when I say a good teachable moment, what I mean is a lot of people are not aware that vermouth should be refrigerated. Once it's open, keep it in the fridge. It'll honestly probably keep a couple of months and be reasonably fresh. If you keep it outside the fridge, it's going to go bad in a matter of weeks. And by bad, I mean it's going to start tasting kind of sour and off. It's not going to harm you, probably, but it's going to taste a little bit more vinegary, and the aromatics are going to be all to heck. And a lot of people think they don't like vermouth because they've only ever had like bad, spoiled vermouth that has been sitting in their grandparents' liquor cabinet for the last 30 years. Put your vermouth in the fridge. Very easy.
Brian, were we at 1 or 2 ounces of rye really quick?
1 ounce of rye, 1 ounce of brandy, 1 ounce of sweet vermouth. So, like those 3 pieces in equal parts, kind of nice and easy to work with. Also, if anybody at home does not have sweet vermouth, this cocktail is also sometimes made with dry vermouth. Both versions are good. The sweet vermouth version is more common, and I do prefer it, but the dry vermouth would also make a very handsome drink. If you have neither sweet nor dry vermouth, but for some reason you have another fortified wine, I would say give it a shot. Your best bet is going to be yet another type of vermouth, or a Pinot de Charente, or most likely like an Amontillado sherry or something like that. But my expectation is that you're less likely to have any of those things than sweet vermouth or dry vermouth. So,
Brian, what kind of brandy are you using tonight?
Oh, great question. I am using a cognac by Pierre Ferrand, which is a French company that also produces a number of other things. The Plantation line of rums is one of theirs as well. In general, I find, and many authors for the last 150 years or so have preferred cognac for cocktail use. But there are perfectly nice American brandies that are available as well. Just, be sure to get a nice grape brandy that's been aged for some number of years. Cognacs tend to have a lot going on and a lot of subtlety, a very nice raisin note, as well as the sort of soft vanilla that we would expect from something that's been sitting in a barrel for a long time. And it tends to be very harmonious in cocktails. By contrast, something like Armagnac, if we have any real brandy fans out there tonight, delicious. I love Armagnac. It's much harder to work with in cocktails. It's much more kind of irascible, much more particular. I think it would probably work in this particular drink, but don't quote me on that. But if it's all you've got, I would say give it a shot.
So Brian, will dry vermouth and sweet vermouth, do they both require refrigeration?
Yes. In general, I would say that once you have opened a bottle of fortified wine, it is probably safer to refrigerate it than not to. All vermouth should get this treatment. If you got like Dubonnet or something like that, that should go in the fridge. If you've got sherry that's open, it's best that goes in the fridge. Cream sherries are probably sweet enough that it's going to be less of an issue there, but it's not going to hurt it to put it in the fridge. So I would sort of err on the side of doing that. The other one that comes to mind is port, which has also probably got a high enough sugar content that it's not going to sort of go off as quickly. But again, it doesn't hurt it to put it in the fridge. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, if you've got something that is fortified wine, put it in the fridge once it's open. Meanwhile, we've got the Benedictine here. You're going to want to use 1 teaspoon of that. I will happily take questions sort of as I'm going here. I just, don't want to lose track of what I'm doing either.
I was just going to say, you might have to go back and give us a repeat of what you've got in that glass, so we're all up to speed.
To recap on what we have so far, I have added 1 ounce of rye whiskey. I have added 1 ounce of cognac. I have added 1 ounce of sweet vermouth. And I've added 1 teaspoon of Benedictine. Excuse me. Another question that I know we got before the event is what to do if you don't have Benedictine. That's a harder question to answer. Benedictine is a very specific thing. It's a honeyed spice liqueur. It's sort of prepared and then aged in oak barrels. It's got notes of saffron and clove and spices. The closest things that I can think of are yellow chartreuse and drambuie, neither of which is all that close. But both of them will, I think, probably work reasonably well in this cocktail if you have one of those, but not Benedictine for some reason. The other thing you might have is B&B, which is a bottled mixture of equal parts of this and brandy that this company also makes. That'll also work. It's just going to give you a more brandy forward drink. So once again, that's 1 ounce of rye, 1 of brandy, 1 of sweet vermouth, teaspoon of Benedictine. I'm now going to add 2 dashes each of the Angostura and Peychaud's bitters. 1, 2. There is a sort of palette that is common across. I have Peychaud's all over my hands now. There is a sort of specific flavor palette that crops up a lot in New Orleans drinks. The city really likes absinthe and anise flavored things in general. Benedictine is common, Peychaud's and Angostura, but especially Peychaud's tend to show up a lot. It's interesting because you can sort of almost game out what a hypothetical, if you were to try to have a bot generated New Orleans cocktail, it would be relatively plausible to do so. It's because there are certain ingredients that show up frequently, and we're using several of them in this recipe. So I've put, one last time, 1 ounce vermouth, 1 ounce brandy, 1 ounce rye, teaspoon of Benedictine, 2 dashes Angostura, 2 dashes of Peychaud's. I'm now going to take some ice. I'm going to add it to my shaker tin here, and I'm going to give it a stir. Generally, I would stir for about 10 seconds to 12 seconds, which is roughly going to be 20 revolutions if you'd rather count revolutions than time. And I'm going to strain it after I trip over my empty absinthe bottle I'm going to strain it into a chilled cocktail glass. The easiest way to chill a cocktail glass is to stick it in your freezer. You can also fill it with ice for a little while and then dump that ice out before you pour something into it. Personally, because I'm in Massachusetts, I cracked open my window and stuck it on the sill next to the window before this all began. And I have to say that has chilled it very, very well. So, all right, I have stirred my drink. Let me get my Hawthorne strainer once again, see how it nests very well into this entirely differently sized and shaped vessel. And I'm going to strain it into my cocktail glass. If you want to express a lemon over this, you certainly can. It's not required. It is done in some recipes. I tend to prefer it without, but once again, that is a matter of personal taste. So we have here the Vieux Carré. Cheers, friends.
Cheers, Brian. We got a question while you were preparing that cocktail, and I know that you've addressed this before. We've talked about it, and I think you might have said a few words at the beginning. There was a question about what do you see are the drawbacks to using whiskey, bourbon, and Scotch interchangeably?
Ooh, great question. So I will begin by saying it is important sort of to distinguish these things and kind of know what we're talking about, what level we're talking about. Whiskey is a broad category header. It refers to spirits that are distilled from cereal grains. So bourbon and Scotch and rye are all types of whiskey. And there are whiskeys that don't have a convenient subtype like that, so they tend to just be labeled as whiskey, which is sort of where this very honest confusion I think sometimes comes from. People say, is this whiskey or bourbon? Well, bourbon is whiskey, so it's both, and that kind of. I used to sell spirits and do tastings at liquor stores, and this was a conversation I've had a lot of different times. So I would say for cocktail purposes, the two types of whiskey that are most commonly called for are bourbon and rye. We also see Irish whiskey and Scotch whiskey being called for reasonably often. And anything kind of beyond those four is going to be mostly sui generis. There is an increasing interest in Japanese whiskey, but we'll come back to that in a second. Broadly, very broad strokes here. If you want to talk about the properties of a given type of whiskey in a drink, of the two American whiskeys, rye is regarded as being a little bit rougher, a little bit spicier. You get sort of strong note of caraway and of kind of just those lovely kind of phenolic flavors that we think of as baking spice flavors. Bourbon tends to present as a bit sweeter. You get some of that corn oil taste, almost a little. In some expressions, I would have to describe it as like butter or popcorn butter. It's not necessarily sweet per se, but if you tasted them side by side, even with no sugar content added to either one, the bourbon is probably going to taste a little bit sweeter. The rye is going to taste a little bit harsher. This means that bourbon tends to play really well in drinks like a mint julep, where that's going to be something you want to reinforce. It's a little bit easier to lose track of it depending on the bourbon. If you've got a high proof or cask strength bourbon, that's not going to be an issue, but an 80 proof rye is going to be more of a presence in a cocktail than an 80 proof bourbon is. The third one, sort of number three, a distant but respectable third in the list of whiskeys by how frequently they show up in cocktails, is Scotch. The most familiar and significant flavor that shows up in Scotch is the smokiness, which goes along with the peatiness, that sort of slightly acidic, earthy character that Scotch acquires. Usually Scotch cocktails are designed explicitly with that in mind, and it's easier to swap a bourbon for a rye or vice versa than it is to swap either of them for a Scotch or vice versa. Although it's also the case that there are cocktails where, like an old fashioned, right, is going to taste good with any of these spirits. If you're using a good whiskey, if you're using a whiskey that it wouldn't upset you to drink on its own, you're going to enjoy drinking it in an old fashioned. You can do a great Sazerac with bourbon or rye. I think the smoke from the Scotch would get in the way in that context. And in the case of this particular drink, I think that a bourbon would also substitute reasonably well, although once again, I'd be a little hesitant to switch in a Scotch.
I mean, you asked and he answered. So hopefully you got some good tips there. Brian, I have to tell you, and I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but your ice bucket, or probably shouldn't call it a bucket, your receptacle there looks a lot like a Maury's cup. And so someone who was watching along on Facebook said, oh my gosh, I thought we were making Maury's cups, which we are not doing. Brian is doing some more sophisticated drinks this evening, but we are actually going to be live from Maury's on Thursday in the afternoon on Instagram, talking with Basie Gitlin and the folks over at Maury's about Maury's cups and the tradition of Maury's cups, because this is Feb Club, and what would Feb Club pre-2020 be without Maury's cups, and hopefully again in the future. So I think with that, Brian, we're ready for our third cocktail of the evening.
I think so too, although I do feel the need to comment just a little bit on what you just said, because while this is not a Maury's cup, the reason that I own this is that it's very like a Maury's cup. And it has been used on a number of occasions for the service of Maury's cups in it. I have to say, it's very difficult to drink out of. And now that the Yale Club of Boston has a proper Maury's cup, I feel like, oh, I'm never going to drink out of this thing again. But if you have attended a Feb Club event held by the Yale Club of Boston from like 2015 to 2018 or thereabouts, you may have drunk out of this very vessel. So it has now been returned to its intended purpose of being an ice bucket. New Orleans drink, which, yes. I'm consulting my my source of recipes here. Drink number 3 is called the Hurricane. Dun, dun, dun. If you have been to New Orleans, you have possibly had something called a hurricane. You have possibly had something that was not all that great that was called a hurricane. Even at Pat O'Brien's, where it was invented, it is not highly regarded as much as it once was these days. There is a cocktail historian named Jeff Berry who has commented that you should go for the lovely outdoor patio at Pat O'Brien's, but order a beer. Which, given that his whole thing is like tropical and rum-based, I'll admit I've never had a hurricane at Pat O'Brien's, although I have had hurricanes made with their mix at various mostly Feb Club related gatherings since my senior year. Part of the issue here is that the original recipe Hurricane, which dates to the 1940s, was probably made with something called fassionola, which I have a bottle of, a reproduction fassionola essentially right here. This is an extremely elusive ingredient. It has caused a lot of controversy, especially in the like neo-tiki community, about whether or not it was ever supposed to be used in any of the exotic drinks that come from the 30s and 40s that are the bread and butter of that genre. But here's what we do know about fassionola. First of all, it began production in Southern California around 1916. There was a guy, he had a lot of land, he started growing passion fruit on it because why not? It was a relatively novel fruit at the time in the American market. I suppose it still is a somewhat novel fruit in the American market. Anyway, he started making syrups with it. He made a variety of different syrups, and he would sell them to soda counters. They would go into non-alcoholic mixed drinks. They'd go into ice cream sundaes, these sorts of things. Red fassionola was one of the more popular types. Gold fassionola was another popular type. They made a few other colors over the years. Fassionola is still made by the company that acquired the rights from the original fassionola company to both the name and the recipe. They're called Jonathan English. They operate in Southern California. If you don't live in San Diego or Los Angeles, you've probably never had their product in a drink. You can order direct from them if you want to, but most people have not known that over the last 30 years or so that we've been engaged in this process of reviving cocktails. So a number of producers, including B.G. Reynolds, who I have right here, have made their own fassionola syrups on a base of passion fruit blending with other things. Theirs is essentially a POG syrup, passion orange guava, with cherry added. I think it's very nice. I think that it replicates my sense of what the original fassionola was supposed to be, although admittedly, I've never had it. If you want to substitute a plain passion fruit syrup or some other passion fruit based concoction for fassionola in this recipe, it will still taste good, and it will probably taste better than making it with the Pat O'Brien's bottled mix that you can get, which is kind of just sort of red flavored. Hate to say it, but it's true. Right, and if you want the real deal, if you want the OG stuff, you can call up Jonathan English and see if they will ship you some, although you probably won't arrive before the end of our time together here tonight. So the Hurricane is a having said all of that, the Hurricane is a dead simple drink. It's going to be rum, passion fruit or fassionola syrup, and lemon juice. That's it. You're going to want to shake it. You're going to want to strain it into a glass that has fresh ice in it because it's going to want that extra dilution. Otherwise, you're going to get a little bit of heavy syrupiness to it. A quick note on rums before I go any further. There's a lot of rum terminology out there. A lot of it is not very helpful. When people talk about white or silver or amber or gold or dark rums, that's all based on color, and color is a very poor indicator of anything in the case of rums. Most white rums have been aged and then filtered to remove their color. Most dark rums have been additionally colored. Some amber rums have been additionally colored. A lot of amber rums and very, very dark rums are actually younger rums than the white rums in many cases, which have been aged up to 4 years. It's a whole big mess. So when I talk about rum to people, when I write books about these things, I use the term moderately aged rum or lightly aged rum to describe, like, the hell with the color. You know, has the rum spent X much time in oak or not? Generally, I would say if it's 4 years or under, that goes in the lightly aged category. 5 to 12 goes in the moderately aged category. Either of those is going to work here. Moderately aged, probably a little bit better. I'm actually using the lightly aged rum myself, but it's aged in small barrels, it's aged in ex-bourbon barrels, so the wood is imparting a lot more flavor, like per unit of time, than would be standard for a rum aging barrel. So, without further ado, I'm going to take my other shaker tin over here. I'm going to add 1.5 ounces of my aged rum, like so. I am realizing that, and then I'm going to add 1/2 ounce of that juice to the glass. I will also note that you can't really see it, I think, because I have done a very good job of concealing it from you, but I'm using some lemons that are kind of old and tired looking. And while, you know, that's not necessarily your best bartending practice, if only for aesthetic reasons, an older lemon will juice just the same as a fresher lemon will. And in many cases, they will juice more easily. So if you are somebody who is making drinks at home, I would say, like, don't throw out your lemon just because it looks a little old. You can still juice it and get a lot of good use out of it. So that's 1/2 ounce of lemon juice. And finally, I've got 3/4 ounce of my fassionola. I will say one other thing, which is if you don't have fassionola syrup or passion fruit syrup or anything remotely like that, this drink is still going to be very tasty if you grab, you know, a convenient fruity syrup. If you got like a pomegranate syrup or something sticking around, or a raspberry syrup picking around your house, that's going to taste good here. It won't quite be the same as a Hurricane, but go ahead and make it. We're all friends here. I'm not going to stop you. So I've got my 3 ingredients, my very numerous 3 ingredients here in my glass. I'm going to dump out the ice from the other half of this tin. And now we're going to shake. So the most important thing when you're shaking a cocktail, the single most important thing, make sure you have a good seal. Actually, no, that's the second most important thing. The most important thing, make sure that you have a hand on each of the 2 pieces of your shaker, because whether or not you have a good seal, it's going to be advisable. But if it turns out you have a bad seal and you're not doing that, that's a great way to end up covered in cocktail. Ask me how I know. Actually, don't. You can probably figure it out. So,
Brian, how much passion fruit syrup did you put in there?
3/4 ounce.
3/4 ounce. Can you just do the 3 ingredients real quick, all the amounts?
1.5 ounces of rum, 3/4 ounce of syrup, 1/2 ounce of lemon juice.
Thank you.
All right. So, got your 2 pieces of shaker together. I recommend a tin-on-tin shaker like this, sometimes called a French shaker or a Parisian shaker. Boston shakers have 1 piece that is glass. Glass can break. I have a scar on my hand for broken Boston shaker. Cobbler shakers come in 3 pieces with an integrated strainer and a tiny little cap on top that you put on the top before you shake. Those caps get lost. I have a cobbler shaker with a missing cap that has been missing for 10 years. Get yourself one of these. They don't break, they don't go missing. They're very, very easy. So give that a nice tap to form a seal. Shake for about 10 seconds. as it turns out, I did not have a good seal on that, so I demonstrated for your benefit the very thing that I was explaining, which is it's important that I had a hand on both pieces, or that would have been a lot worse. As it stands, we got a few drops of hurricane on my sleeve, and I think I will live. All right. Finally, I've got my Hawthorne strainer. If you want to look really cool with the Hawthorne strainer, you can see what I'm doing here. Do it one-handed, one finger on either side of the handle, pressing it down like so. Then give that a nice pour right into the glass that you've already put ice in. And I picked a glass that was a little too small for that, but that's okay. This is what happens when we do things live. Cheers. Enjoy the hurricane.
Thank you, Brian. That one looks amazing. I am a huge fan of passion fruit, so I kind of wish you were in my kitchen mixing that up for me right now. But one day when we return to in-person events, top of my list, Brian. I hope everyone enjoyed following along with Brian tonight. We are going to hang out, take a couple more questions. I would also love to invite anyone who followed along to join us on camera if you'd like to show us your cocktails this evening. Those of you who are on Zoom can do that by just raising your hand or chatting me, and I will gladly bring you on the screen. Also happy to take questions if anyone has them. I'm just checking over on Facebook as well, and I see some comments about Pat O'Brien's, which is the hot topic tonight. Linda had no idea they were supposed to taste like passion fruit, so I'm guessing it tasted more like Hawaiian punch, I think is what it looks like. That's a secret, huh, Brian? Pat O'Brien's, they lost track.
Yeah, so, and it's an interesting thing too, because Pat, as far as Pat O'Brien's is concerned, they have always made the hurricane according to a proprietary recipe, and they've not acknowledged any change in that recipe to the best of my knowledge. However, there was an interview given within like 10 years of the drink's first appearance by either the person who was alleged to have invented it or somebody else who was working there the whole time. It was given to an obscure adult magazine called Cabaret. I've only ever met one person who has actually read this interview, but it is frequently quoted as having established that it was a fassionola drink. And fassionola was a syrup that had been like it had been available principally in California. It was shipped other places, and it was definitely a more interesting thing than a lot of the syrup we think of now. Even something like Rose's Benedictine is basically red flavored corn syrup. And it's very easy to make red flavored corn syrup. You take corn syrup, you color it red, and then you add kind of whatever aromatic chemicals you want to it, and it's gonna kind of all read the same way. I think that the things that are called fassionola or that are passion fruit based are going to make a far superior drink to to something of that type that you might have unfortunately had at Pat O'Brien's. There is another cocktail writer named Chloe Frechette who has written a book on tiki drinks, who explicitly described the Pat O'Brien's Hurricane as it exists today as red flavored. And it's really they've gotten a lot of like ragging on by people who make and write about drinks for a living, and I feel like there's a good opportunity here if they want it to to reclaim their own legacy, because lots of people are very invested in it and are kind of regarding Pat O'Brien's as not the best place to go and get the drink that they invented, which is sad.
We have one brave soul who would like to join us to show us her cocktail. So I'm going to bring Stacy on in just a minute. If anybody else would like to join us, we're getting rave reviews about the hurricane, Brian. So it sounds like you did a great job. Let's see. There is a question about, can you make a hurricane with passion fruit juice instead of just syrup? And I would guess, how would that work out, Brian? Hi, Stacy.
Good question. There are on the internet available some fun recipes for how to make your own passion fruit syrup, beginning with passion fruit juice. I would say you could make something that is reasonably close to a hurricane using passion fruit juice rather than syrup. I would just kind of back of the napkin here, instead of 3/4 of an ounce of passion fruit, I might say use 1/2 ounce of it and then add like 1/4 ounce or more of simple syrup, and you will get in the ballpark. Truly the most important thing, the hardest thing to replicate, is the flavor of passion fruit. It's sweet and it's tart and it's floral, and it's got that kind of like non-specific tropical taste to it that not having something with passion fruit is a harder problem to solve than having something with passion fruit that isn't quite what is intended. So I would say you're gonna want that extra sugar. Passion fruit is very tart, but yeah, passion fruit juice is not a bad thing to swap in.
So Brian, we have Stacy and a guest with her, and it looks like they followed along. Do you guys want to unmute, say hello, tell Brian how he did tonight? This is the fun part of being live. Let's see. This is the constant Zoom conundrum of mute, unmute. Hi guys.
I enjoyed it very much. We didn't have passion fruit, a little bit of the blackberry liqueur with the orgeat mixed together.
That sounds delicious.
What do you think, Brian? Thank you, guys.
You got to find an appropriate natural phenomenon to name it after.
So where are you guys watching from tonight, Stacey?
Outside of Boston.
Awesome. So you guys could hopefully see Brian again in the future. If anybody else wants to join us, I think we have one or two more people who want to join us. I'm going to go ahead. I have one. If you guys want to hang out, feel free to stay. I have one quick question from Facebook, then I'm going to disconnect from Facebook and hang out here for a few minutes. So Brian, let's see. We've got a comment that there was someone who was ready to fall back and make it with Navy Strength Smith & Cross, which was the bottle he found first. How unbalanced would it have been if he had gone with that?
I mean, oh man, I have a relationship with Navy Strength Smith & Cross rum. For those who don't know, Smith & Cross is a 114 proof aged Jamaican rum. It is funk is a word that is used to describe Jamaican rums, like a sort of a lot of like floral and decomposing fruit kind of flavors. The hogo is another term that comes from ogu, I think is how you say that, a French word that talks about like sort of seasoned game meat, and by seasoned I mean kind of like left out to dry the way you season wood. There's this slight like eau de décomposition that is very characteristic of Jamaican rums, and I recognize that everything I've said may make it sound very, very unpleasant, but it is extremely interesting in sort of the same way that some of the things we think of as off flavors in wine, that Brettanomyces kind of like barnyard scent in small doses can be very interesting. And it's when it becomes like there's too much of it that it begins to be a problem. So Smith & Cross is an absolute funk bomb. It is a very flavorful rum, and it is a very potent rum. And I used to drink that stuff on the rocks. It's delicious. I am a rum drinker by preference. I absolutely adore it. I think it would make a fabulous hurricane. Speaking as someone who used to drink stuff by itself, I will note that within a year of beginning to drink Smith & Cross just on the rocks, I was informed by my doctor that I had GERD, and that I have to think these two things might be at least a little bit related. So proceed with caution. But I would say if you wanted to do this with Smith & Cross, I think it would be fabulous. I would dial the rum back by a quarter to half an ounce, and that would probably put it reasonably within range of being balanced. But it would be a very tasty drink.
Right, that's too much. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sign off of Facebook, but I invite anybody who's in Zoom to hang out and chat for a few minutes. Before we do let you go, though, want to send everybody over to the Feb Club EMERITUS website, which has tons of events throughout the rest of the month. This was our Yale Alumni Live cocktail party for Feb Club. And Brian is actually hosting another Feb Club event on Thursday with New England Yale Club. So head over to, what is your website, Brian, where people can check it out?
YaleBoston.org, and to be clear, it's not just me this time, it's the whole Yale Club of Boston, as well as I want to say 7 other Yale clubs from around the New England region representing 5 states. I don't know what happened with New Hampshire, but we've got the others all ready to go. And yes, YaleBoston.org is the place to go to sign up for that. It is free, and we've got an enormous crowd already signed up, so if you want to mix and mingle with people from around New England, come and see us this Thursday.
Feb Club is where it's at, and I couldn't let this go by without thanking Tim Harkness, our faithful Feb Club Emeritus volunteer who organizes this every single year and does a fantastic job. We've heard that there have been tons of events this month, even though it's virtual. Yaleys are connecting through Feb Club, and we are so grateful for all of you being here with us tonight. So I'm going to hang out and Zoom with Brian and our cocktail makers, and I'm going to log off of Facebook, but thank you all so much for being here. Those of you in Zoom, feel free to hang out for a few more minutes. Bye, everybody in Facebook land. We'll see you on Thursday on Instagram, learning about Maury's Cups.
Classic Cocktails is the name of the book, Facebook.
Classic Cocktails by Brian Hoefling. All right, guys, we are off of Facebook. So if you guys want to unmute and chat with Brian, if anybody else wants to come on, you are more than welcome to. You guys in the corner there, welcome. You made all the drinks, it looks like, huh?
Yeah, we made the syrup with this
passion orange.
Oh, awesome.
Demerara sugar.
so it's not quite pop, but it's pole.
Yeah.
So which was your favorite drink? Did both of you guys, did everybody watching make all 3 drinks?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite?
probably the hurricane. Yeah.
Hurricanes for the win, Brian. That's where we got.
It's really good. Thanks for the class.
Thanks for the class.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Stacy and company, you guys did all 3 too? Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. If we have anybody else that wants to come on camera with us or ask any questions, Brian's hanging out with us for a few more minutes.
Brian, tell us again the name of that rum that you like on the rocks that you were saying before.
Smith and Cross is the name of the rum.
I'll write that down. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with us tonight. Thank you for making the cocktails. It's always nice to see who's on the other end of our live episode. So it's been a lot of fun. I think everybody looks like they're logging off. Thank you so much for being here, Brian. As always, a pleasure. And we'll see. I'll see you on Thursday. Since you guys are in Boston, Stacy, hopefully we'll see you on Thursday as well. Awesome.
Thank you. Yes.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your night. Enjoy your cocktails. We'll see you again soon. Brian, I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everybody. Good night.